Welcome to the quantum realm. Here is the truth no one prepared you for. The moment you called yourself a failure was the moment your field began its most precise recalibration yet. You weren't falling apart. You were being taken apart. Deliberately, surgically, and with a level of intelligence that exceeds anything your conditioned mind was designed to comprehend. What you experienced as collapse was compression. What you labeled defeat was density shifting into form. What you mourned as loss was your quantum field releasing dead weight so it could hold something heavier with light. This transmission is not a consolation. It is not motivational content. It is a recalibration signal. And if something in you went quiet the moment I said that word, then this message is not arriving by accident. You didn't fail. You were being tuned. Before we go further, pause for just one moment. If something in you recognized that opening, even slightly, lock it in. Like this video to anchor the signal. Drop a comment below and write, "I am being recalibrated." That act of declaration is not symbolic. It is a quantum confirmation of your observer state. And subscribe. Because what unfolds here continues beyond this transmission. Let's define what you've been living inside. The 3D identity program. The one installed through education, culture, family, and repeated societal conditioning. Operates on a single foundational lie, that your worth is determined by your outcomes. Pass the exam. Get the promotion. Build the relationship. Launch the business. If it works, you are enough. If it doesn't, the program whispers, you have confirmed what it always suspected. You are not. This is what Thoth called the veil of the dense world. The Hermetic traditions named it the Great Illusion. The belief that form is the measure of truth, when in fact form is only ever the delayed echo of frequency. Modern quantum mechanics stumbled onto this same understanding, just in different language. The observer effect tells us that the act of observation collapses the wave function, meaning reality doesn't fix itself into form until consciousness interacts with it. The field holds infinite potential until attention lands. What this means, and stay with me, is that there is no such thing as a failed outcome at the level of the quantum field. There is only a field that hasn't yet collapsed in the direction your conditioned mind expected. And here is where Sophia enters, not as metaphor, not as ancient archetype alone, but as a living transmission of divine intelligence. The feminine wisdom principle that operates beneath the architecture of your personal story, beneath the timeline of your results, at the level of your original quantum signature. Sophia does not measure you by what you've built. She measures you by what frequency you're holding. And today, she has a very specific message for those of you who called yourselves failures. Let's enter the mechanics of this. In quantum physics, a wave function describes the probability distribution of where a particle might be. All possible positions, all possible states, simultaneously held in what we call superposition. Nothing is fixed. Everything is potential. The moment an observer interacts with that system, the moment attention enters, the wave collapses. One possibility crystallizes into form. Now hear this carefully. The collapse is not the failure of the other possibilities. It is the field responding to the observer's current frequency. If your frequency, your internal coherence, your emotional energetic signal, is calibrated to scarcity, to lack, to unworthiness, the field collapses in alignment with that. Not as punishment, as precision. The Arcturian Council has described this in transmissions received across generations of light workers. Your field does not misread you. It reads you exactly. The question is never whether the field responded correctly. The question is always, what signal were you actually broadcasting? This is the distinction between failure and recalibration. Failure is a 3D judgment. A story layered over an event by a mind that was trained to evaluate outcomes as measures of identity. Recalibration is what actually happens. A quantum field rerouting, compressing, and restructuring itself because the frequency it was operating at had reached the ceiling of its current configuration. Think of it this way. A radio transmitter does not fail when it goes offline for recalibration. It goes silent so it can be retuned to a higher bandwidth. You were that transmitter. The silence you experienced, the pause, the stall, the collapse, was not evidence of your insufficiency. It was the field creating the conditions for a new bandwidth to become available. Yet the ego cannot hold this understanding. The ego lives in linear time. It compares now to then. It expects consistent forward motion as the only valid form of progress. And when the field compresses, when things seem to stop, reverse, or dissolve, the ego calls it defeat. But compression is not collapse. Compression is coherence building pressure. Think of carbon becoming diamond. Immense pressure. Complete darkness. No visible movement. And then, crystallization, not despite the pressure. Because of it. Sophia's teachings carry this understanding at their core. She does not bring comfort through bypassing. She brings clarity through precision. And her precision is this. Every dissolution you have experienced was a density you could no longer carry at the frequency you were being called toward. The relationship that ended. The business that didn't launch. The plan that fell apart. The identity you thought was yours. And then, wasn't. These were not failures of execution. These were field corrections. The Arcturian transmissions call this a timeline compression event. A moment where multiple probable futures collapse into a narrower, more coherent pathway, because the field has enough information now to route with greater precision. And here's what gets overlooked. Fear, doubt, and ego resistance are not your enemies in this process. They are signals. Indicators that attention has collapsed from the field level back into the story level. They are not proof that you're broken. They are data that your observer state has temporarily narrowed. The work is not to eliminate them. The work is to recognize them and to return. So how do you actually do that? How do you move from the 3D narrative of failure? From the weight of judgment, the ache of lost time, the heaviness of I should be further along, into the quantum recognition of recalibration. We begin here. Exactly where you are. Step 1. Locate the contraction. Right now, as you listen, bring your attention into your body. Not your thoughts. Your body. Place one hand on your chest. One on your abdomen if that feels natural. And notice. Not judge. Simply notice, where is there tightness? Where is there holding? Where does your breath stop before it completes itself? That contraction is not evidence of your failure. It is the precise location where your field compressed. Most people spend years trying to think their way out of contraction. They analyze the situation, the timeline, the decisions. They construct new plans. They search for the lesson. But the field doesn't respond to thinking. It responds to coherence. And coherence begins with contact. Contact with what is actually present in the body, in the breath, in the sensation of this moment. So stay here for just a moment. Breathe into wherever you feel the tightness, not to fix it, not to release it. Simply to acknowledge that it is there, that it is information, that it is your field speaking in the only language the body knows. Step 2, shift from narrative to field. Here is a distinction that changes everything. Your narrative about what happened. The story of the failure, the timeline, the people involved, the decisions made. That narrative lives in linear time. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And within that structure, it is always constructing meaning, always judging outcome. Your field does not operate in narrative time. Your field exists in the quantum present, the living, vibrating, responsive now, where all probable futures are still available. The moment you shift your attention from the story to the field, from what happened to me, to what frequency am I generating now, you re-enter your power as an observer. And remember the quantum principle. The observer collapses the wave, which means your point of attention is always shaping what crystallizes next. This is not motivational framing. This is physics applied to consciousness. Step 3. Recognize the recalibration signal. Sophia's transmissions include specific indicators that distinguish recalibration from genuine stagnation. These signals are worth memorizing. Sudden clarity in unexpected moments. You are not trying to solve the problem. And then, mid-shower, mid-walk, mid-silence, something becomes obvious that wasn't before. This is the field delivering information it could not access while you were inside the noise of the narrative. Synchronicities that feel too precise to be random. The exact book. The exact conversation. The exact phrase from a stranger that addresses the exact question you'd been holding. The Arcturian Council describes these as harmonic field confirmations. Moments where the field is showing you that your frequency is aligning with a higher coherence pathway. Resistance that feels old rather than current. When the resistance you feel is not about the present situation but carries the emotional texture of something much older. A childhood wound, an ancestral pattern, an identity you inherited. That is your field surfacing what must be cleared before the next configuration can stabilize. Then heightened intuition in the body. Not thoughts about what to do, but a kinesthetic knowing, a sense of rightness or wrongness that exists below the level of reasoning. This is your quantum antenna recalibrating its sensitivity. Step 4. Stabilize the observer state. This is the practice that separates understanding from activation. Most people can intellectually follow everything I'm saying. They nod. They feel a resonance. And then 3 hours later, they're back inside the story. Back inside the weight of judgment, the urgency of catching up, the background hum of, I'm not where I should be. The observer state collapses not because you failed to understand, but because the field of attention is a practice, not a destination. Here is the stabilization protocol Sophia gives, once per day, ideally in the morning, before your conditioned mind has fully activated its narrative loop. Spend 5 minutes in pure observer breath. Sit, breathe, and with each exhale, mentally release the story of where you are in your timeline. With each inhale, receive this intention: I am the field, not the form. This is not visualization. This is attunement. You are not trying to create a feeling of success. You are not trying to override the present reality with positive thinking. You are simply practicing the act of holding frequency outside of narrative judgment over time. And this is the quantum principle of coherence entrainment. The nervous system begins to recognize this state as its baseline. The story loses its grip not because you fought it, but because the field became more familiar than the fiction. Addressing the blocks. Here is what arises for almost everyone at this stage. But I've been trying for so long. How do I know this isn't just another attempt that will end in the same place? That question is not your wisdom. That question is the echo of the 3D program running its favorite subroutine, pattern projection. It is taking the past, which was a different frequency, and projecting it forward as the only possible future. But you are not the same frequency you were. The recalibration you survived has already changed your field. You cannot re-enter the same timeline because you are not the same observer. The wave function collapses differently when a different observer is present. You, right now, having moved through what you moved through, are a different observer than the one who entered that experience. Which means the field is not holding the same possibilities it was holding then. It is holding new ones. And fear, when it arises, is not a reason to stop. Fear is a signal that attention has contracted from field awareness back into story identification. The antidote is not courage in the dramatic sense. It is simply return. Return to the breath. Return to the body. Return to the present frequency. The field is always here, waiting for the observer to come home. Now that you understand the mechanics of recalibration, and you've begun the practice of stabilizing your observer state, we can move into what the Arcturian Council calls embodied mastery. This is the stage where recalibration stops being something that happens to you and begins to be something you participate in consciously. Most awakening processes follow a specific sequence. First, dissolution. The old structure breaks down. Second, disorientation. The identity built on that structure loses its reference points. Third, recalibration. The field compresses, reroutes, and begins seeking a new coherence configuration. And fourth, crystallization. The new form emerges, not from planning, but from alignment. The reason most people get stuck in the third stage, recalibration, is that they attempt to force stage 4 before the field is ready. They feel the compression and interpret it as delay. They feel the disorientation and interpret it as failure. And so they either push harder against the field's natural timeline, or they collapse entirely into the story of defeat. Sophia's guidance on this is precise. The moment you stop trying to produce the result begins to organize. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not telling you to sit passively and wait. It is telling you that efforting from the level of the story creates interference in the field. And interference delays coherence. The distinction is this: inspired action. Action that arises from a state of inner alignment, from a clear sense of next right movement felt in the body, from frequency rather than urgency. That action amplifies the field's coherence. Reactive action. Action taken from fear, from the pressure to prove worth, from the compulsive need to do something to escape the discomfort of the compression phase. That action creates distortion in the field. It generates static, and static obscures the signal. So how do you tell the difference? Inspired action feels spacious even when it requires effort. There is a quality of rightness, of inevitability, of movement that is with something rather than against it. You may be working intensely, but the intensity carries an internal coherence, a sense of being in your lane rather than fighting for a lane. Reactive action feels contracted even when it produces results. There is urgency underneath it. A background hum of, if I don't do this, something bad will remain true about me. The action is tethered to the need for external confirmation. Learn to distinguish these two qualities, not by analyzing them, but by sensing them in the body. And you have one of the most powerful tools in conscious co-creation: timeline shifts and synchronicity fields. As your coherence stabilizes, as you practice returning to the observer state, as you learn to act from frequency rather than fear, the timeline you are moving through begins to shift. This is not metaphor. From the quantum perspective, you are always navigating through a field of probable timelines, configurations of reality that are more or less likely to crystallize based on your current frequency. As your internal coherence rises, you naturally begin moving along a timeline pathway that reflects that coherence. And the field will confirm this. It has specific communication channels. Synchronicities will increase, not dramatic miracles, though those are not outside the field's capacity, but precise confirmations. The right person appears. The right door opens at the moment you had released all attachment to it. A conversation happens that addresses the exact thing your field was processing in silence. The Arcturian transmissions call these harmonic field anchors. Moments where the field is showing you that your frequency matches a higher probability pathway. They are not rewards. They're calibration confirmations. And here's the mastery within the mastery. The moment you begin expecting synchronicities. When you start to chase them, analyze them, feel entitled to them as evidence that your practice is working, the signal weakens. Because expectation, when it carries urgency, is a low coherent state masquerading as trust. True synchronicity recognition has a quality of quiet gratitude, a noticing without grasping, a receiving without demand. Sophia moves in the space between demand and desperation. She cannot be summoned by urgency. She emerges in the silence you create when you finally stop trying to force the field into your preferred timeline. Anchoring into daily life, the final integration, the one that distinguishes a temporary awakening experience from genuine embodied frequency mastery, is anchoring. Anchoring is the practice of carrying your observer state into the friction of ordinary life, not just into meditation, not just into quiet moments, but into the conversation with a difficult person, into the financial stress, into the uncertainty of an unknown outcome. This is where recalibration becomes permanent, because the field doesn't just test you in retreat. The field uses daily life as its primary recalibration chamber. Every moment of irritation that you catch before it collapses into reactivity, that is anchoring. Every moment where you sense the familiar grip of the scarcity narrative and you consciously return to field awareness, that is integration. Thoth called this the practice of the eternal witness. The Hermetic principle that the mind trained to observe itself without judgment becomes a mind that can alchemize its own conditions rather than simply react to them. You are not trying to become someone who never feels fear, never experiences contraction, never encounters the story of lack or loss. You are becoming someone who can hold the field even while the storm is present. The lightworkers of the Arcturian transmissions describe this as diamond consciousness, a state that does not absorb external chaos but refracts it. Pressure does not break it. It clarifies through it. And when you are operating from diamond consciousness, when you are anchored in your quantum observer state, when you are acting from frequency rather than fear, when you are allowing recalibration rather than resisting it. You become what the field calls a harmonic anchor, not just for yourself, for everyone who enters your field. This is the reach of recalibration that no one talks about. But that when you stabilize your frequency through your own compression event, the field around you shifts too. The people in your life feel something different from you. Not something you declared or performed, but something that emanates from the coherence of your signal. This is how light workers function on the planetary grid. Not by broadcasting information, but by being stable signals in an environment of increasing frequency disruption. You have been through compression. You have held the silence. You have, even in the moments when you called it failure, continued to move through rather than give up entirely. That tenacity was not accidental. It was frequency-appropriate behavior for the configuration your field was being called into. You were always being prepared for a bandwidth that could not be reached from the frequency you were at. The failure was never real. The recalibration always was. And now you know the difference. Here's what this transmission has activated: the recognition that nothing you have moved through has been wasted. That dissolution is not defeat. That compression is not failure. That the silence between your efforts was not emptiness. It was the field gathering coherence for what comes next. You are not behind. You are never behind. You are always exactly where your frequency required you to be for the recalibration to complete. Sophia does not speak to people who have it all figured out. She speaks to those who have gone quiet enough to hear her. You heard her today. That is not nothing. That is everything. Now, here is my question for you. From what part of the world are you watching this transmission? Drop your location in the comments below. Your signal matters here. The field is listening.